to get a conservatorship for her son. But what is actually happening in this whole thing? We got Christopher Melcher here. You're not going to miss this. Welcome to Popcorn Planet. I am Andy Signor. So happy to have you back, Christopher. How are you doing, sir?
Pretty good. Glad to be here.
Always a pleasure. We are trying to pivot to other stories, guys, and here's a good one. I hope you will watch and share and get this out there, because obviously we covered the Free Britney movement very closely as that all happened and unfolded, and so did Cher. It was interesting because Cher was out there on Twitter, some tweets just up on screen that you can pause and read if you want, talking about the power of bringing Britney out, what the conservatorship can do and how wronged Britney was. There was all this, pro-Britney, anti-conservatorship language. So when I saw that she was out there trying to get one for her own son, it was odd to me. It felt like, well, this must be really bad because she knows how this goes, Christopher. So I haven't really followed as closely as I wanted to, but today, I guess this week, Monday, she was now denied. She was denied this request to get her son under a conservatorship. Now, I wanted to have you explain it because it sounds like to me there is potential motives here that may not be as innocent as she's saying. Can you elaborate on what she's actually requesting before we get into why she was denied?
Sure. Yeah, it is. There's definitely red flags here. So how this thing kicked off, well, actually, you go back to a story from last year where Elijah Blue Allman, her son, was in a hotel room in New York, and there was an allegation, and there's stories around this where Cher had allegedly sent people to essentially take him out of that room and bring him to California for rehab. And then there was a filing of divorce between Elijah and his wife. Fast forward then to last month, where Cher then files for temporary emergency powers over his estate, meaning over his money, and claiming that he has, this horrific drug problem and that he's at risk of harm because he has all this money and there's yet money more to come, and that if he had access to this money, he would use it on drugs. Now, there are some serious problems with the way she started with this that are reminiscent of Britney. Now, when this thing started, Cher said that he was missing and couldn't be found. And turns out, well, he was in Mexico and, apparently knows that, where he was, or at least he's claiming that. So he wasn't really missing. And that's important because to get a conservatorship over someone, you need to bring their person to the court so that the judge can lay eyes on this person and ask them questions and make their own assessment as to whether this person really needs a conservatorship. That was not done with Britney. Britney was on a 5150 hold when that conservatorship, the temporary orders were made without her being brought to court in violation of California law. So here Cher is basically trying to do the same thing. Another thing that happened is that when Elijah found out about this, he went out and immediately hired a lawyer, which of course he has a right to do. And that lawyer contacted Cher's attorney and said, give me all the papers, because some of these were filed under seal. He didn't have access to even what she was alleging. Cher's lawyer said, no, I will not share this information with you. It is private, even though it's about him. And claiming that there was already a court-appointed attorney for him. Again, exactly parallel to Britney. When Britney was placed under this conservatorship without notice to her, without her bringing her to court, a person was appointed as her attorney she had never met. And when Britney hired her own lawyer, Adam Streisand, they wouldn't recognize her. So the same thing happened here. So this is again, a lot of parallels, huge red flags. Fortunately, Elijah's attorney was recognized in court. Fortunately, this judge is very bright and said, I don't like any of this, and I am denying, the orders right then and there, set it for a hearing, which happened on Monday for people to bring in more information. And then, we'll talk about what happened on Monday, but that's the backstory of the case.
So it's interesting because we were talking about this, the big red flag for you, and we're going to go on what happened and why it was denied and everything. But the big red flag was if she was really concerned about his drug use, his abuse, there is a something she could have actually done to force him into rehab that wouldn't have taken all his money, correct? What's odd here is she didn't do that. She chose the approach to get the money. which implies what do you think that means? Why do you think there's potentially something sneaky going on if her motivation is to get access to the money?
That's right. So there's two types of conservatorships in California. One is over the estate, meaning control of finances, and the second is over the person. So could be putting them in rehab, where they live, all these kind of things. Brittany was
Which,
under
not to
both.
interrupt, but to be clear, Brittany had both of those, right?
Yeah, the most it's restrictive you could think of. Now, of course, Cher is citing to Elijah's, kind of drug problems, which seem to be well documented, and he himself does not deny. He says, "I've had substance abuse problems in the past." So she's citing to that, and so for a headline, that kind of makes sense. She's the mom; she's trying to protect her son, who has a drug problem. But like you're saying, she didn't check the over the person box. And that is the only way she could have forced him into rehab. Without that power, he can voluntarily check himself in and he can voluntarily check himself out of rehab. So if her concern was that he was in such a state that he would take so many drugs that, it would end his life, then she would have needed to, or would have checked the over the person box to put him into rehab. But she didn't do that. She just checked the money box. And yeah, there's a lot of money and that could be blown, but that's not the end of the world. It's his money. And the other thing is that even if his money was restricted, he does not have there, he doesn't need that much money to harm himself with illicit substances. Unfortunately, some of these things are very inexpensive and available, and we see that street level use of this stuff. So he doesn't need, have access to millions of dollars in his trust or restricted to keep him from getting access to drugs. So there's a disconnect there between what she's saying and what she's asking, which then leads to a question. Why would she do this? Why would she want control? And I do have some theories about that. And I think that she's definitely overstepping her role as mom.
I want to hear that, but just to wrap up what happened she got emotional in court saying that her son would not be alive within the year, clearly playing to those sort of heartstrings and making it emotional. The judge then said, I don't question Cher's concerns being driven by concern for her son. I don't think Allman questions that. The justice said that this was not sufficient evidence to agree to the temporary conservatorship, since much of what they were arguing was based on fears and hypotheticals. That in and of itself is not basis for the court to appoint a probate conservatorship. I have not seen evidence to grant a temporary emergency conservatorship as of today. Also pointed out, Allman has proved he has managed his finances, has an apartment, and has remained drug-free after doing several drug tests. So again, didn't go in her favor. I guess what's next? What can she do now? Does this put an end to it, or does she have other means to try to still appeal?
The court denied all of her requests for temporary orders and set a hearing for March 6th on her, main petition, because this was all about temporary emergency relief. Kind of sky's falling. I need orders immediately. The judge had two hearings on that, denied it both times, and said, okay, if she is going to persist in making these requests, they set it for a hearing on March 6th to, say, hey, are we even going to consider this any further? So I imagine she would drop it. She would be smart to drop it based on these developments that Elijah has come out and said, look, I love my mom, but I don't need her help. And, basically leave me alone. And this is not the kind of help that I need. And he has taken steps, like you've noted, which seem, rational. And honestly, the best way to get help is through him believing that he needs help and doing it on his own terms voluntarily rather than being forced upon him. So if she persists with this at the March 6th hearing, again, it just seems to validate or would validate the theories that I have about what's really going on here. So in these type of over the estate conservatorships, one of the powers that can be granted to her if she were to get this is to change his will and trust. And there's a procedure in the probate codes, probate code 2850, called substituted judgment. And so normally any one of us who have capacity or in adults can make our own, last will and testament, make our own trust for in the event that we die or become incapacitated, where our money goes. And also to kind of restructure things financially. So here she's going on this theory that he has such a severe drug and alcohol problem that he is incapacitated and potentially would be asking for these types of rights to maybe invalidate any provisions that he's given to his wife now that they reconciled. Maybe changing distributions that are supposed to be coming to Elijah from his father, Gregg Allman. Maybe saying that instead of him getting a boatload of money, because some of these will say when you reach a certain age, the vast fortune unlocks for you because you're presumably, old enough just to get the whole thing without restrictions. Maybe she's coming in there saying, I want to block that. These are some theories or speculation on my part, but I do think that they're validated in part by what she is doing. So that's a concern for me, that this has something more to do with money than it does with drugs.
Well, it's weird because it's like if you make a will and can't you go and edit that or redo it like as Cher's, choice, making a will or testament or whatever these things are? Why would she need that order to adjust how it's handed out?
Well, Cher can do it on her own for her own will or trust, but she can't do it for Elijah's. So one example would be, let's say Elijah made a will or trust that said, if I ever die, I want my wife getting everything. Well, as long as he had capacity when he signed that, and if he dies, then wife gets everything. So one theory is that Cher doesn't want that happening and wants to go in there and saying when he signed those documents, he did lack capacity. So therefore, terminate that judge. Another thing is that if there were trusts established for Elijah by his father, Gregg Allman, that call for big distributions, Cher has no individual power or authority over that. That was established by his dad, but she could go to court and have the court change it. So potentially. So that, like I say, that is my sneaking suspicion. I don't have evidence for it, but I suspect that there is something like that going on. Because if it was just like, I want to get my kid into rehab, she would ask for rehab orders, not money orders.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's definitely interesting because she seems to be anti-conservatorship, and maybe there is a version of this where she's just concerned that he's going to throw all the money away, and a lot of that money clearly came from the family. And at the same time, she just can't control it. So it's interesting that she would try to do this method to do that, especially given how vocal she was for Britney and this whole idea of, nobody saw the absolute power of conservator has over a person they were meant to protect. It was one of the most excruciating, heartbreaking episodes I've seen. Don't be fooled by the word conservator. Look into the ways they can be paid. I mean, Britney was a prisoner, totally loose. It's weird to me. This is a huge red flag to see how vocal she was. Was she doing research to figure out how to do it later to her son? Like being a double agent here to Britney? I don't know, but it definitely asks a lot of questions. And I agree. It's one thing to be worried about your son, but if you're that worried, then yes, click the box so he can actually get the rehab, which she didn't do. I think your red flags sound valid. Anything else to add? Final thoughts from you, sir?
I mean, we're seeing this with Jay Leno and his wife Mavis. They're married over 40 years, and he's going into court for conservatorship over her to do the substituted judgment. He's completely, transparent and explicit about it. He's like, look, we made an estate plan when she was healthy. She now has dementia, and I want to make sure that her wishes are met, including a provision for her brother that's not currently in their estate plan. So Jay Leno is, out front about this, and he's saying, and he's worried. He's saying, look, if I happen to die before my wife won't be capable of handling, the estate as a successor trustee because she has dementia. So he wants to put in place somebody that can control things that he trusts. So that's done completely beneficially.
Right. That's an example of where this actually can be done properly when you have dementia and things like that. That's what a conservatorship is actually supposed to be for, correct?
Of course. Yeah, it absolutely. And somebody who has a drug problem is not, it's not an appropriate candidate for conservatorship. This is not designed for that. There has to be, proof that this person is incapable of providing for their own needs and is subject to fraud or undue influence. And sure, maybe while he's under the influence of something, Elijah, is vulnerable. But the kind of condition that he has, substance abuse disorder, let's say, is not something that would qualify him for having his civil rights taken away and placed in the hands of another adult.
Fascinating. It also gives me shades of the Bam Margera case as well, which I know BJ or Surprise Witness has covered in great detail. But if you want more updates on awesome stories, legal analysis, when he has time, he puts them there on Twitter. So make sure you're following him. Let's get his numbers up. CA_divorce. To follow Christopher Melcher. Always a pleasure, sir. We'll have you back soon, I'm sure. We're trying to pivot to other stories. If you made it this far, tell me down in the comments what you thought. Yeah, we didn't talk about that duo. Thank God for once. So excited to be here with you guys. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for alerts. And what are your thoughts on Cher? Do you think something seems fishy? I want to hear your comments. Smash the like button before you do. Go down below, leave us your thoughts, and stay tuned for more here on Popcorn Planet.